Good evening, everyone. It's a real pleasure to host the first event of the academic year and to do this with a person that I respect a lot. I respect a lot everybody, of course, but this one especially. Mario Marcel, he's the finance minister of Chile, someone that manages the economy of a middle-income country, someone that has been in many different incarnations in the past. He's been in the Central Bank of the country. He's been in the World Bank. You've been in the Inter-American Development Bank. So you've been observing the economies of many developing countries, the economies of middle-income developing countries, managing your own, and you've got probably many insights on how to avoid falling into the middle-income trap, which I guess is what you're going to be sharing with us tonight. So we are going to let you talk. Feel free, and after that, you will be grilled by our students. They are generally kind, so they grill in a kind way. Without further ado, Minister, floor is yours.
Okay, good evening, everyone, and thank you very much to the Dean for inviting me to share with you some thoughts this evening. This is at the end of a pretty intensive day, which we call Chile Day, where we traveled to, in this case, to Paris with a number of Chilean business people to meet potential or actual investors in Chile that, of course, are always very interested in learning about, the direction of economic policy process for the country and so on. So that is what I have been doing all day. Then we continue in London Monday and Tuesday. But in dealing with, trying to understand what is going on in the Chilean economy, you come very easily to this notion of a middle-income trap, which is a rather loose concept, but very appealing. There is no question about that, especially because, it appears as, capturing the reality of a number of middle-income countries that once they build up their dreams, their plans, their development targets, they find that growth starts to slow down, that things don't get through in the way that you expected, that politics becomes very complicated, and then there is a lot of frustration. This notion of a middle-income trap motivated the World Bank to devote the World Development Report this year to this issue. And in that report, they note that if you take into account, if you add up countries that moved from middle income to high income status in the last 30 years or so, they add up to a very small share of the world population. And in comparison with that, the size of middle-income countries that remain in that status is considerably higher, with a substantial share of world poverty and so on. The World Bank devotes their own analysis. They develop this notion of 1I, 2I, 3I strategies, by arguing that countries, after, concentrating on investment, then they should move to infusion, that is bringing knowledge and know-how to the country to apply to productive processes, and then they should add research, knowledge, and so on. That is the third I. When you try to bring that to Chile, first of all, you have to know that in Chile, for sure, we have had a slowdown in growth. that is reflected in a near zero growth in overall productivity in the last 15 years or so. That we underwent a major social uprising back in 2019. We have undergone a period of high political tensions, but all that happened not at the border between middle income and the upper middle income country. Actually, it happened pretty much at the border with high income, a high income level. So it happened, let's say, at a more developed stage than these theories appear to suggest. And actually, the World Bank in the World Development Report features Chile as an example of a country that did well in dealing with the middle income trap. But that is pretty different from the sentiment that we have in the country. So in order to, from here, there are a number of questions to be asked. Why all these issues happened at the more advanced stage of development in Chile? Secondly, does this really respond to the notion of a middle income trap as understood by the World Development Report, and whether there is a way forward, or actually we are trapped at a slow growth, complex and conflicting society trap. So what I would underscore here is that first of all, we have to understand what were the causes or the sources of high growth in Chile in the late 1980s, 1990s, early 2000s. So in that 20-year period, when per capita income levels increased substantially, what was going on in the country. And there are a few things that happened. First of all, that there was a strong basis given the level of education of the population, strong institutions, a country that is rich in natural resources, but particularly Chile opened very broadly to the world economy, both on trade and investment, at a time when globalization was the driving force across the world. So therefore, Chile benefited from a rather broader process that was globalization, and with an open economy, with trade agreements with many countries in the world, with very open capitals market, we received a lot of foreign investment. Our trade grew substantially, and so on. Secondly, we had a rather deep financial markets and macro stability, and that, of course, that is also helpful in providing a sounder basis for growth. The depth of financial markets came from compulsory savings through the pension system, and also on fiscal discipline that prevented the government from borrowing and crowding out financing for private investment. On top of this, we have a demographic bonus. In Chile, in the 1990s, the working age population was growing quite substantially, while population over 60 years of age was growing at a slightly smaller pace. But above all, we have a demographic bonus during that time that provided a major increase in an educated labor force. Now what is happening, what has happened more recently is that many of these things change quite radically. Today, of course, the world scenario is not of globalization, it's rather of a stagnant international trade plus trade disputes. So the room for getting an additional push on development from the openness is no longer there. Secondly, that financial markets development slowed down after the global financial crisis of 2008, 2009. All the capital requirements and so on, all the new regulations limited the ability of financial markets to further develop, and that the demographic bonus stopped. And right now we're very close to the point when a working age population will start to decline in absolute terms, while population over 60 years of age will be growing at 4% per year over the next decade. So therefore, the dependency on workers will increase, is increasing quite substantially, and will increase even further in the years to come. So perhaps rather than thinking of the middle income trap in terms of these engines of economic growth and so on, I think that when you combine these forces, you can understand both the strong push on growth earlier on, and then the slowdown that we're having today. Now, when you combine, but one further thing came with strong growth in the 1990s and early 2000s, which is the growth of the middle class. The middle class, the estimates on the middle class pointed at a number close to 20% in 1995, and by 2017 it was 65% of the population. So it's Chile is one of the countries with the largest growth in the middle class in Latin America, probably the largest of all. And that brought a number of new challenges to the economy, society, and politics. Middle class usually endorse a number of values and demands, especially demands for security, that require a rather strong state to respond to that. You need a sort of welfare state that would help to manage life and economic related risks for people. But we didn't have such a strong welfare state, and therefore insecurity became one of the concerns of the middle class. Secondly, the middle class grew partly on the basis of debt, and therefore our middle class became over-indebted, and with all the effects that has on the dynamics of households and so on. Middle class is also much more demanding in terms of transparency, fairness, and so on. And of course, that combined with a number of scandals, cases of companies' abuse on customers, and so on. So that added to the challenges, and with all those things put together, it's not that difficult to understand the social uprising of 2019. Of course, it's easier to tell that after that happened, but I think that's perhaps a way of understanding what happened, because when people were complaining about inequality, transparency, abuse, and so on, if you rank countries in Latin America, Chile is not the most unequal country. Chile is not the least transparent country. Chile is not the country with a stronger or worse abuse on consumers. But what really makes the difference is the size and the dynamics of the middle class. Mm-hmm. So with that, you may wonder, well, where we go from here, because all these elements are still there. And actually, after the social uprising, we had the COVID-19, It is true that there were a couple of smaller reforms that were adopted, and then there was a constitutional process that failed twice. People rejected two constitutional proposals, so that stalled. So where we move from here? So, the first thing to note is that another middle class issue, which is, the demand for security, for stability, and so on, has become much more relevant. And today you see, demand for gradual change that is stronger than it used to be some time ago. But other than that, there are things that are changing in the world that are creating a new window of opportunity for Chile. No longer a demographic window of opportunity, no longer global trade, but the greening of the world economy. And that is, when you have, almost every country in the world committing to goals of carbon emissions reduction and so on, you will need a lot of electromobility, you will need a lot of batteries, you will need a lot of renewable sources of energy, and Chile has all that. So these days it's pretty fashionable to look at climate change as something demanding a lot of resources and probably imposing a shorter run cost on almost every country in the world. But in Chile, combining with the cost that we have to deal with, the potential benefits far outweigh those costs and risks. In my view, this is creating the possibility of moving ahead or moving away from this sort of trap. I wouldn't call it a middle income trap, just a trap combining all the factors that I just discussed. And this relating to the discussion or the proposals from academics and captured in this World Bank study also means a major challenge on innovation, because lithium, renewable energies, green hydrogen, the digital economy are all very intensive on innovation. There actually are innovation, either to produce lithium without damaging salt flats that are very fragile environments, to green hydrogen, which is a developing industry. It's not something that you can take from a shelf or from an investor and put in a country. So these opportunities are also required. To grasp these opportunities requires to invest a lot on infusion and on innovation. That is pretty much how opportunities look like. And the other source of opportunities for Chile have to do with gender equity. Chile is a country that, at least from an economic point of view, is very gender unequal, both in terms of salaries and labor participation, even though the education of the population is pretty homogeneous between men and women. Addressing gender equity issues, that is part already of the policy agenda in Chile, can also generate a new source of dynamism to the Chilean economy. Of course, there are a number of policy challenges related to this. How to avoid overprotecting incumbents, how to generate risk-sharing mechanisms in emerging industries, how to exploit synergies, how to deal with small and medium enterprises. All those belong to some of the policy challenges that are related to the kind of restructuring of an economy that should come in grasping this sort of opportunity. So I will stop there. Probably spoke longer than necessary, but I will be very happy to take your comments, questions, and thoughts. Huh? Thank you.
Thank you. It was great to hear about all the difficulties, but also to hear about solutions, because there are also solutions. With this, I'm going to pass the floor on to you. Whomever wants to ask the first question has to go to the mic. There is one on the right and another one on the left. You tell us who you are and you put your question. There we go. You have to go to the mic so that we can hear it. There is one here and there is another one there. The first day is always difficult because this is a ritual. But once we do the first day, everyone knows the ritual. So we'll start with you, and then we follow with the lady.
Testing.
Yeah.
Ministro. Well, I'm Nicolas. I'm from Chile. So I'm very happy to see you here. My question is related to last year. The tax reform wasn't approved by the Congress, the Chilean Congress. When things don't go as expected, especially in such a critical, concern topic for the government's program, how do you manage to overcome this kind of scenarios as a minister?
Thank you.
Yes. Last year this was a major setback for the government and for our team that had been working on a tax reform that we thought that made a lot of sense, particularly thinking about the dynamics of revenues and expenditures in a country that is facing the kind of context that I just described. In particular, the aging of the population is very demanding on public resources. Pensions and health are, of course, two pretty large sectors of public spending anywhere. But with older population growing at 4% per year, of course, that involves a huge pressure on government. In addition to that, there are a number of new topics that the governments have to undertake that were not there in the past. And some of the older issues are not moving away. Yeah? And, the interaction between, let's say, climate change issues and security, citizen security, is a very good illustration of that. Over the last few years, we have been investing a lot more on the environment. The previous government basically kept spending on the police, the judiciary, and so on stagnant. Actually, declined a little, and crime shot up. And 4 years later, we were dealing with a crisis that require a response that involved resources. So you need resources, you need funding for all these issues, while at the same time, if you are not changing your tax structure, revenues will, at the most, will grow with economic activity. And in the case of a country like Chile that relies a lot more on VAT, that means rather slow growth in revenues compared to very dynamic expenditures. So that translated into systematic deficits that made the public debt to move from some 7% of GDP 15 years ago, very low for any international standard, to nearly 40% today. So in a matter of a little more than a decade, our debt increased a lot. That is not sufficient to move a lot back in terms of sovereign risk, but it's sufficient to generate additional pressure on spending on interest payments. So that's why we needed the tax reform, and how we dealt with failure, basically by reassessing the way we were presenting or proposing these reforms, building more dialogue with the representatives of political parties and social and economic actors. We put together something that we called the Fiscal Pact, that included pro-growth measures, reform of the state, and tax to fund some priority spending on pensions, health, citizen security, and social care. And on the basis of that, we have, and with a lot of persistence, we have moved ahead. We divided the tax proposals in two blocks or two packages, one relating to tax compliance, the other on income tax reform. And tax compliance is now about to be passed by Congress in the next couple of weeks. It was not easy as a process. It required a lot of discipline and ability to listen and to find, to be creative in finding solutions. But we managed to move ahead. And something similar may be happening with the pension reform, which is the other very, salient reform that we are undergoing or discussing in Chile.
Say this why I was saying I respect Minister Marcel.
Okay, I'm Haoran. Can you hear me? Yeah, I'm Chinese, and I'm from the International Development Program. So I have two questions. The first one is regarding the green economy. So what actions did you do before? And the second question is, what's your actions to develop economy but alien with the SDGs in the future?
Sorry, the last part?
What's your actions to develop economy but alien with the sustainable development goals?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Development goals became pretty complicated once we moved from the Millennium Development Goals to the Sustainable Development Goals. They multiplied a lot. In Chile, we tried to focus on some parts of those where the challenges were larger, and we have been working on articulating a number of policies around that. You may have noted that when I mentioned priority spending, I included social care there. That has to do with the fact that part of the reasons that explain the lower labor participation of women is that care for young children, the elderly, or handicapped people rely a lot on women, and that was very evident at the time of the COVID-19 crisis, because hundreds of thousands of women left the labor market to care for their relatives and so on. So this is something that is pretty much, for a very long time was seen as something that just was resolved within a household or within a family. It was a kind of family arrangement. But with the aging of the population, in particular, and that has to do with the grey economy, if you will, that needs a sort of a more institutional response or a policy response that can raise up to the scale of this process. So now, the current government is putting together a whole strategy to deal with social care. Of course, we don't have the resources to do all that in one go. It will be sort of gradual process, but this is becoming like a fourth major area of social policy, in addition to education, health, social security or pensions, we are now building a fourth pillar around social care. So that is something that is happening in a number of countries. I'm sure that in Europe there is a lot of concern about this, but in Chile is becoming a sort of new area of public policy that we are very busy working on.
Thank you.
Thank you, Minister, for your time tonight. I'm Caleb. I'm South African, and I'm in the International Development Masters. And my question was, what strategies is Chile taking to diversify its economy away from a primary sector, mining and agriculture, especially driven development model, into one that potentially doesn't have as high of an upper bound in development? Thank you.
Yes. Well, in Chile for many years, we thought that diversifying production meant that instead of exporting wood, we would export furniture. But that didn't happen because we lacked the comparative advantages to do that. So we learned that when you have certain sectors that are more dynamic, it is important to see how the value chains around that develop. So, for instance, in the case of mining, from the mid-2000s, from the time of the first Bachelet administration, we developed this mining cluster that is basically related to suppliers of the mining industry. So the major mining companies work together to develop their production linkages and invested in training and research or whatever in order to improve or to increase the value added of that. And then they became sectors that could be able to provide services elsewhere independently of what happened to Chilean mining. It's not always easy to find that kind of connection. But now, for instance, I mentioned rather briefly, renewable energy. But when thinking about renewable energy, it is interesting to look at the contrast with our previous productive base, because we do not produce oil, we do not produce fuels. We import all of that, and we were extremely dependent on imported fuels. So now, as the technology has evolved, and solar power and wind power is cheaper to produce, when, for instance, now we have the capacity to storage energy at a large scale, then this became a new driving force in the Chilean economy. We started a number of years ago, more than 10 years ago, we started awarding contracts to produce blocks of energy on the basis of renewables. So we have had a lot of investment there. Right now, more than 60% of energy is produced from renewable sources, and by 2030 that will move up to 85%. So that creates a whole set of new sources of comparative advantage, because prior to that, anything involving energy was disadvantageous to us. Now we have a comparative advantage, including the production of green hydrogen. I know that every country in the world today says that they're going to produce green hydrogen. Every fora you go, everyone is saying green hydrogen. The advantage of Chile is that Chile has the highest rates of solar radiance in the world. and the strongest and most constant winds both in the north and in the far south of the country. So yes, they are natural resources, but in order to turn that into energy that could be used for other purposes, you need to develop industries. You need to develop the capacity to turn green hydrogen into something that can be moved, in the world, either e-fuel or ammonia, and from there, I mean, there are a number of linkages that you can exploit. So those are two examples of what we're doing, but diversifying our economy means that we develop new productive sources. We will still be a mining country for many years. I mean, there's no question about that. But all these other things combined with mining to produce a more dynamic economy.
Thank you. Lady over there.
Hello, my name is Rhea. Thank you so much for speaking to us after what I can imagine was an intensive day. And if we could, I would like to ask you about that. What were your strategies and incentives today that you went with while trying to approach firms for investment, especially in light of the two main growth opportunities you mentioned for Chile?
Yes. Well, on investment, we have a number of challenges because like in many countries in the world, we are currently facing financial constraints because we are at a time when interest rates are high because central banks are trying to bring down inflation. And on the other hand, that as the country has raised its environmental, social standards, all that translates into permitting processes that have become quite cumbersome because they have grown sort of spontaneously. Different ministries, agencies, and so on have, introduced the regulations, and with regulations, some processes to implement them. So Chile has not had a regulatory policy as such, and without that, the complexity of the authorizing and permitting process has become quite substantial, and therefore the time needed to bring an investment to the field and so on, it has become quite long. In the case of a mining project, you may need 8 to 10 years only to get the investment started. Of course, that is a rather extreme case, but it gives you an idea of what has happened. In many areas, times required to get all the permits may have doubled in the last 15 years or so. So we are currently working on how to cut red tape without compromising environmental, health, urban standards. And we currently have in Congress several bills that deal with this, one dealing with environmental permits, another one with dealing with sector permits, and then we have a few more that are more sort of more specialized. So that's one of the things that we are doing. On the side of financial conditions, of course, we have to let the central bank to normalize monetary policy, and I think that with that, the environment for investments will improve quite a lot. This is in a striking contrast with the discussion in the country, because if you look at what people discuss there, everything has to do with uncertainty, with risk, but investment is something that is not easy to model, but you cannot deny the relative importance of financing and the relative importance of this red tape issue. So we are trying to concentrate on that rather than on the sort of more ideological discussion that usually takes the press and some political forum.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Gentleman over there.
Good afternoon, Minister. My name is Guilherme from Brazil. I am a student here at the Master in International Security. So I wanted to ask you about the Mercosur trade bloc. So you talked about how more openness and increased international trade was essential for Chile's growth in the 90s and early 2000s. But the country chose never to become a full-fledged member of the Mercosur bloc. It stayed an associated member, I think is the title. So I wanted to ask you, why do you think that it is? And if now in a context of a slowdown in trade, if maybe an approximation with the bloc and with its member states is a possible solution to increase trade? Thank you.
Yes. Well, you know that a number of years ago, in 2001, I joined President Lagos when he came to France to lobby, leaders to persuade them to negotiate a trade agreement with Chile separate from Mercosur. 23 years later, we have a trade agreement with the European Union that is already going into a renewal after 20 years of operation, and Mercosur doesn't have a trade agreement yet. Of course, that doesn't mean that we are not interested in our neighboring countries that are members of Mercosur. We have trade agreements with them. We are observers with Mercosur, or we are an associate member of Mercosur. But unfortunately, the level of protection of Mercosur is higher than what we have as in terms of tariffs with countries that are member of this association. We have tried to develop also links with countries on the Pacific side of South America. There is this Pacific Alliance. It's not a trade agreement. It's a much looser kind of bloc. But I think that the main challenge with Mercosur for a country that is smaller like Chile is how to gain room there when the association is so unbalanced between the relative weight of Brazil and Argentina as compared to the other countries, and that is what has always made the things more difficult for us in terms of looking at Mercosur. But in any case, I would mention that in these days of trade disputes, I believe that we have to revisit some of these broader associations, because for a small open economy like Chile, to navigate these very stormy waters of the U.S. against China and the European Union and so on, for a small country it's not very easy to navigate that, and it's better to be part of something broader that would provide more say in the development of global trade relations. Maybe that is not necessarily Mercosur, maybe CPTPP with countries in the Pacific area. But in any case, I believe that in this post-globalization world, the whole thing, the whole issue of international trade alliances have to be thought in a different way by a small country like Chile.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Gonna take a question there.
Hello, Minister. Thanks for your sharing. I'm also a Chinese student from Master of International Development. I want to ask about the current situation of the international efforts that help Chile to transit to a green economy, and what are the barriers in this context? Maybe the barriers of technological spillover, or maybe over like dependence on the foreign technology and ignore the local innovation? Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, well, I think you point at a very important issue, and something that I believe it's a weakness for Chile in terms of development, which is a very low level of investment in research, innovation, and so on. In Chile, our R&D plus I takes 0.4% of GDP. It's extremely low. A large part of that is public. Therefore, investment of the private sector in research of development is particularly low. There are a number of ways of approaching that. In what we're preparing now, as in the proposal that we are preparing on income tax reform, we are multiplying by 3 incentives to research and development in the private sector. We are trying to build stronger alliances between universities, regions, and the private sector. But when you rely so much on natural resources, this becomes a challenge. There are areas of interesting developments. In the case of, let's say, the salmon industry is something where, we have made a lot of trials and errors, but it's a huge industry so far. But I believe that in order to move from this status, perhaps these new growth opportunities become a good incentive to invest more on research and development. Actually, with the lithium strategy, we are creating a research institute on lithium and the salt flats in Chile. But we will have to persist over a long period of time to invest from the public sector and to try to generate better incentives for the private sector.
Thank you.
Thank you. The clock is ticking, so we're going to take the last 2 questions together and let the Minister answer them. Let's start with the lady over there.
Thank you, Minister. I'm Isha from India. I'm doing the Masters in International Energy Transition, so my question relates to lithium. What is Chile's strategy with respect to lithium? I know it wants to nationalize its resources, so could you please elaborate on your plan for nationalization of Chile's lithium mines?
Thank you. Last word.
Minister, thank you for your time today. My name's Jack. I'm come from Australia, and I'm doing the International Security Masters here at SPIA. My question was to do with possibly expanding on your earlier statements on joining international economic alliances, particularly the BRICS alliance, and whether, in your opinion, what are the advantages and challenges in doing so?
Okay. Well, we have spoken a lot about energy, and I should have mentioned that we have the Minister for Energy here with us. So maybe you can enjoy, coffee or a beer afterwards with him. But on the lithium issue, the interesting thing about the lithium in Chile is that we don't need to nationalize lithium because its legislation gives full control of the state over the extraction of lithium. That comes from the time of the military because they thought that lithium was central for the nuclear industry, and therefore they declared that as entirely reserved for public sector production. So we are currently involving the private sector in the form of joint ventures on rental agreements with a royalty, to capture economic rents. But it's pretty much, we cannot nationalize something that already belongs to the state. And on BRICS, I think that, I'm aware that BRICS have been trying to enlarge that constituency by not looking not only at the original countries but also trying to bring other countries into that or building an alliance that goes beyond that. Now, building an alliance with Russia today, it's quite challenging after all that has happened. I don't think that this is a particularly a positive time to think of something stronger than being part of the BRICS Bank. Some kind of some mechanisms that they have been trying to create, but moving from there to something that may look more like a political alliance, I think it's pretty challenging these days.
Okay, so we've promised to keep you to 7 o'clock, and it's 7 o'clock on the dot.
Exactly.
Thank you, Minister. I think we should give him a big applause. So I didn't tell you, Minister, but in this first trip of former President Lagos to Brussels to lobby the European institutions, I was there as a very, very young Commission official, and I will never forget the knock on the door, but also the way Europe opened the door. So you see, sometimes history comes in this very funny ways. All right, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much.